I think I'd like to start by understanding with you something more um, about what we speak about when we talk about colonization and decolonization, the deconstruction of something within us, around us. This is something that Extinction Rebellion is really coming to some terms with via a project that we are embarking on called the Co-Liberation and Powerfulness Project.
Mhm.
And what I mean when I say co-liberation is simply that we want to notice that our liberation is interdependent. There is
Yeah.
no liberation, my liberation, without yours.
Yeah.
There is no flourishing for me without your flourishing. And by powerfulness, I mean that place that Martin Luther King spoke about when he talked about power as love's demand for justice, and as power as the highest expression of standing and correcting everything in the way of love. Extinction Rebellion is wanting to deeply inquire into co-liberation and powerfulness. But of course, the inspiration maybe is this huge political and becoming cultural term, I think, of colonization and decolonization. So I wonder about what all of that says to you and to your heart, and what that means for you in this moment.
Colonization, beyond the institutional definitions of colonization, um, I feel at least the term conjures or awakens for me this notion, this concept of being incarcerated in a particular world, um, in a particular way of knowing, in a particular way of seeing, in a particular way of acting, um, that is exclusionary, that diminishes the contributions of other kinds of agencies, other ways of being in the world. Um, we tend to speak about decolonization as a return to an original, return to a static image, like reclaiming a past. Um, but there's also something quite um, reiterative or sticky about the notion of returning to a past. And sometimes I actually say that that's ironically a reinforcement of colonization. Like colonization presents to you an image, um, and speaks in with the grammar and the lexicon of uh, deploys the lexicon of authenticity, and basically says if you want to be a true this person, then you have to look like this. Because what white modernity, um, or colonization, white colonization, what whiteness is about, white modernity is about stabilizing identities or stabilizing the world,
Mm.
indexing, categorizing, flattening the world so that um, the fetish of the self, the human as man, can thrive. So it's this rationalized realm where the agency of the human is central and is the only um, uh, legitimate source of agency and
Yeah.
change. Decolonization to me then doesn't mean a return to a past or reclaiming of a lost image. It sometimes means to me touching our bodies. And I mean, by bodies, I don't mean just the human self. I mean our vast bodies. I mean that we are incarcerated in and imprisoned in boxes. And modernity, for it to work, needs those boxes to be occupied. It needs me to be properly Black, to be authentically Black. It needs you or anyone else to be authentically themselves. And then it works with this. That's why I usually say diversity is not a scandal to modernity. It can work with diversity. What it cannot work with is spillage, is people seeping or spilling away from their boxes, is exile. So decolonization to me is exile. It is it is it is spilling away from the categories with which we have been contained, with which we have been rendered intelligible, by which our bodies are framed and understood and made visible. It's going invisible. Decolonization is going invisible, so that our bodies are no longer comprehensible to the systems that understand us, that render us visible.
That speaks to me so very deeply on such a personal level. My heritage is Kashmiri, and my parents were both sets of grandparents moved from Kashmir because of the incoming East Indian rule, colonization, takeover. And my father was born and raised in Kenya, and my mother's family moved to Pakistan, and she was born and raised in Pakistan. And then here I am in the UK, being born and raised, and actually I feel lost in between the boxes. And I think many of us can relate to that story of especially, I suppose, humans of color and culture feeling displaced, feeling their soul, the ancestry of their souls feeling so well traveled, and so not knowing, and yet consistently being told we have to know who we are. I have to tell you who I am. Where am I from? What do I do? What do I think? And what you're suggesting feels so tremendously liberating. And I've seen in your work you talking about fugitivity and emancipation, and these words of being in exile. And what is coming to me personally right now is how scared I am when I step into that place where I can't say where I'm from and who I am and what I do for a living, and how I identify. What is frightening place that is, and yet obviously so much more true. But I suppose I'm wondering about the fear for people, for all of us, and how is it that we can support each other to make that step into fully claiming our exile, because it's not just exile, is it? It's also a lostness. It's also, and so I wonder about that, Bayo. How do I support my brothers and sisters within all the communities that I am in? How do you support your brothers and sisters with all the communities that you're in to do this work of becoming lost?
Beautiful question there. Brings to mind the, I like to say this all the time, and it's a diffracted paraphrasing of something that Yoruba healer from Nigeria said to me while I was conducting my doctorate research into indigenous notions of psychopathology. And he said to me, in order to find your way, you must become lost. You must become lost. And I feel that has so much theoretical weight that I could spend the rest of my life swimming in those waters of becoming lost. But in direct response to your question, my dear sister, I think just in posing that question, you're already making room for others. Just by asking this question right now, or having this conversation, and saying, I may not know where I'm from, or I do not know how to describe what I do. Not being clear is something of a failure. in the modern sense, even in a postmodern sense. You want to be articulate, you want to be intelligible, you want to be able to present a business card. Um, Taking pride in failing in this way is a form of fugitive refusal that basically says maybe there are other places of power in not knowing what I'm all about. Maybe there's something powerful in not knowing where I'm from. Uh, and maybe by not knowing where I'm from, I can claim to be from everywhere and nowhere at once. And that might be the kind of loosening that modernity needs in order to finally be composted. I think in these times it's becoming easier for us to speak about failures. For instance, here in India, during the pandemic, um, people rushed to journalists, interviewed my wife. Um, and what did they interview her about? It was, we hear you've been unschooling your child since she was born. She's never been to school. She's 7 years old now. How do you sit with the awkwardness of children at home, right? And suddenly it was a new question that could not have been posed in other contexts. The pandemic kind of made it possible for those things that we had previously considered failures, because up until this time, we've been struggling with the larger culture that basically says if you're not sending your children to school, there's something wrong with you. If they're not earning grades at this point in time, there's something wrong here. I feel there are cracks opening in the ground, right?
Mm.
The fabric of whiteness is tearing, and our ability to put a band-aid on it, to stitch it back together, is not as fast as
Mm.
it previously was. And from these places, failure sprouts. The things that have been pathologized sprout.
Yeah.
And then we can now share that with each other and say, you want to talk about your failure? How about we share with each other? Yeah, I think it's becoming
That's
more
just
prominent.
beautiful. It's just beautiful. And so hard,
Yeah.
so enormously hard to become ineloquent,
Mm,
or to become free in eloquence.
yeah.
And your story about your wife reminds me of my eldest child, who was a school refuser
Mm,
until she got to 13, and we found her a Steiner school. But until then, she point blank refused to go to school. Um, and she was, I now know and understand that she was demanding her freedom from
mm,
all that might enslave her. Instead, as her mother, I was again feeling um, the pressures of those awkward questions, and concerned for a future that she might not fit unless she was in the future that was being designed around her, with her, unless she was in it, how could she fit in it? And again, I suppose, if I think about Extinction Rebellion in relevance to that, we have this movement that has never been about fitting. It's always been about truth force and this authentic self, this place between worlds. And that's its power. And it's also it's also its lostness. I spoke to a wonderful man called Andrew Samuels. He's a Jungian psychotherapist, a few weeks ago. And he talked to me about Extinction Rebellion needing to become cool, needing to be on the cover of Vogue, needing to inspire the most powerful people in our society. He reminded me about the French Revolution being led partly by lawyers. I'm with you, heart and soul, in supporting this lostness, in supporting the in-between place, the non-binary, the non-dualistic. And yet I feel this pull, like I did with my daughter, to
uh-huh,
put her in school because I wanted her to be part of something, and to put
right.
Extinction Rebellion in the world, to be part of something in service to something greater. And I wonder
Well,
how, when you hear me say that, what you think.
lots of things. Well, I don't think the French Revolution is a good example of visibility there, or the the partnership with powers, because the French Revolution, for all it's worth, still left the throne intact,
Mm,
right? The
yeah,
storming of the
arcing,
Bastille,
absolutely. Yeah.
right, still led to Napoleon Bonaparte coming up. So it didn't exactly. It's just like a revolution that becomes institutionalized.
Hmm.
Now, I'm not going to absolutize, if that's a word. I'm not going to make absolute my recommendations, if they can be called. If you're hearing a recommendation there about going under, about diving in, about becoming lost, or using Deleuze's phrase, becoming animal, I'm not going to say that that's an absolute and that should be the center of politics today. I'm not going to dismiss representation, speaking to Prince Charles, or getting on Vogue, or speaking with Oprah. Who knows? Who knows? Some of those strategies might lead to fruitful places, right? However, I feel that we're in such a time when there's this upheaval, and we're beginning to notice that the ways that we have responded to crisis in terms of getting ourselves out there have only led to us being part of the systems that we're trying to dismantle. And our rhetoric might be pure, it might be strong, it might be indigenous. And yet, the world isn't um, singularly, exclusively made of rhetoric. The materiality of our participation is such that even with our rhetoric, the system, um, I hesitate to call it the system, but the algorithm, the murmuration of bodies that is modernity, kind of takes it in and uses it, puts it in the family way, so that you're just part of dissent. You're just part of the architecture of activism. You're known, you've been tabulated, you've been noted, you've been put on paper. I feel that maybe a different strategy is to get lost. And
Mm,
I'm not saying that needs to replace um, our efforts to reach Oprah.
mm,
Um, but
mm,
maybe it could be a strong supplement. Some of us need to go
absolutely.
underground.
I hear you about that strong supplement, that side order, the unseen order at the side. Um, and I think that exists. What gives me so much energy and nourishment within Extinction Rebellion is, I think we have a really strong sense of what is extraordinary and unspeakable and um, sacred and um, undefinable, indescribable. I think we have a reverence for that. Um, and I suppose, and I've spoken a lot actually about moving from becoming activists to becoming activators, moving moving our identity on, um, without losing ourselves, that part of us that speaks from, maybe it's a core rage. There's great emotion, I think, actually, that is the center of Extinction Rebellion, and some of it's rage, some of it's grief, some of it's longing. As someone who has been part of trying to inspire vision, um, and visionary cultures and regenerative culture, I'm looking for more ways, Bayo, of um, encouraging and making space for what we're talking about here,
Mhm.
for how okay it feels to want two things at the same time, to
Mhm.
want the order of our three demands and a climate emergency bill,
Right,
and to want the indescribable,
right.
the place of mystery,
Uh-huh.
and to hold space for both of it. How would you describe to the average activist that may want to think about becoming an activator and may want to think about the indescribable and everything we're speaking about here, but are not quite sure that they're not quite sure that it's tangible enough, that it's it's sure enough within them and around them. Yeah. And sometimes, okay, so sometimes it's just a readiness that, you know, every human being has to work out for themselves, right? But if I'm still here with a longing to want to help the readiness, to want to help prepare the table. It's like some of us really long to prepare the most welcoming table we can, you know, the table where as many people can gather, and we've got substantial food to offer. It's not just pie in the sky, and yet that's what we're talking about. Pie in the sky. So yeah, I'm trying to get deeper, and I'm probably not doing a very good
No,
job,
no,
but
you are. I'm teasing out the inquiry there, and I feel it's very vital to say, for a start, that these intangibles that we're speaking about are
mm,
actually not airy fairy, uh, cloudy, story like ideational thing. They're actually bread and butter issues, right?
thank
You
you for
come
saying
to a
that.
point. You come to a point when you realize, as someone like me, probably um, will do. Probably it's in our bones in Africa that those people who are at the forefront of the battles of activism
Mm,
um, are earning a lot of money and are somewhat like the system, like the people that they're trying to. And I'm not speaking about all of them, but I'm speaking about the streetwise sense that most Nigerians have. That if you're an activist and you're receiving foreign direct investment, you're receiving lots of donations and stuff
mm,
like that, and it's a quick way to rise.
mm,
It's another form of social mobility.
mm,
You come to a place very quickly when you realize that the way you're responding to the crisis is part of the crisis. When you find out that forward movement is no longer possible, and this is not true for everyone. There's some of us that might feel a clear path forward in, towards what you call activation, the activators. You know, in terms of that, there's some of us that will see that, but I'm in touch with lots of people in lots of contexts that are like, I don't see how I can continue. My despair is getting in the way of movement. My grief is getting in the way of forward movement. In other words, in the words of Stacey Alimo, if I'm quoting her correctly, forward movement is no longer possible in the Anthropocene, and we can no longer walk straight. So, what do we do with the awkwardness of this moment? That is what's most interesting to me. I call it post activism. When your world ends and a new world, an alien world now beckons, what do you do with that? What do you do when solutions only reiterate the problems you're trying to address? Then you have to start asking different questions, or else you're in trouble. And I can speak more on that, but I sense a different question coming up.
oh, well, you've taken me back actually to the emotional heart of
Uh-huh.
Extinction Rebellion, that is rich with grief, as you've just touched upon, and despair, um, and fear, and rage, pure, unadulterated rage for what we have lost, what we are losing, and the powerlessness that invites us into. I feel rage often is an expression of powerlessness, and the project again is about how what Brittany Cooper describes as eloquent rage, when you're able to describe the challenge the obstacle, the reason you feel your rage, and you're able to describe what you want instead, what you're longing for instead. That's and she describes that as eloquent rage. But I think the thing that keeps occurring to me, especially on a personal level at the moment, the word that keeps coming back to me is forgiveness. As a freeing, as an energy that frees us beyond our rage. So even beyond becoming eloquent about what we want, because actually that goes back to what you're saying about solutions. It can just reenact something very deep in our psyches, in our colonized psyches, right? For me, there's the step beyond is forgiveness.
Mhm.
And I wonder for you what that word means, because I get scared of that word, knowing how much suffering, how much demand for justice there is, how much valid outrage, and heartache there is. I become scared of saying the word forgiveness, because somehow and sometimes that can mean letting people off the hook,
Right.
letting ourselves off the hook, letting others off the hook, letting systems off the hook, letting the perpetrators off the hook. And yet I think there's so much unrealized power and forgiveness, and I want us to talk about it.
Okay.
So I wonder what you.
Okay, I'll need some time to get through this. Let me see if I can go just enter into the rhizome this way. From my Christocentric background, forgiveness would be letting people off the hook, right? God forgives us. That means releases us from our debts, and someone else pays the debt. Um, I'm no longer of that particular faith. I'm recovering from that, even though I acknowledge its contributions to my journeys, and it's still in my family. I feel an expanded vision of, of forgiveness would be exploring our mutual indebtedness. Um, um, or let me put it this way. Let me twist it a bit. Um, introduce a little bit of bewilderment here. Um, when we blame others, the idea is that they are already independently blameworthy. And we're only noticing their blameworthiness. And so we call them out, and then we perform the rituals of transferring blame to criminality and guilt and uh, repentance and all of that. But I feel blaming is a way of creating the blameworthy. That we don't necessarily identify things in a way, in the same way that a ruler doesn't just measure length, it creates length. Thinking about the quantum physics of that, it creates the measures that it supposedly measures independently. It doesn't pre-exist. It doesn't exist prior to the measurement, right? So we are creating the blameworthy in a way. And what this tells me, in a sense, is that the ways that we assign blame, the ways we create the blameworthy, the way we make accusations, is interesting and might rope us into that field of creating blame. So, in a sense, we are already entangled with the sinner, with the enemies, with the 1%, with the ones on the other side we're trying to defeat, right?
Yeah.
Forgiveness would transcend in that kind of analysis. It would transcend just me just allowing them to go. It would also mean me noticing um, the tools with which I've used to conduct this research or or create the blameworthy. Um, what this introduces for me is I feel that forgiveness is maybe an opportunity for us to explore together the ways we're complicit in the systems, in the realities that
Yeah.
we're trying to leave behind. That we're complicit in ways that are
Mhm.
shocking, to say the least. That
Absolutely.
even in our activisms, and many people find it very strange for me for anyone to say that activism could actually be part of the justification for contemporary activism. Could be one of the ways that the system reinforces itself, that it gives us a thing to do and it gives us a place in society.
Mhm.
Um, and then society finds a way to assign to you a corner so that you can keep on doing what you're doing. But it's already marked the spot around you, you see.
Yeah.
Your protest has already been marked and tabulated, like I've said earlier. So maybe one thing that is the call of what I call post-activism is to start asking hard questions. Not just how can we forgive them, but what does forgiveness ask of all of us? What does forgiveness invite all of us to do together? um, that is that might release us to other places of power, um, so that you know we're not playing the same games over and over again.
That's very, very beautiful. Um, I think that's what I mean by moving from becoming from being activists to becoming activators, because it's like for me, it's what can we activate, um, and 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 before we activate the doing, for me there's an activating a our deepest, truest feelings that we have been hiding from, and or not even hiding from, that the Enlightenment project or modernity or colonialism, whatever, they're all intrinsically linked, right? What they have told us is wrong, or and what has been so deeply suppressed by the culture that is. I hear you entirely, and I feel it. It resonates through my body when I know that forgiveness is the work of you and I to do together in relationship.
Right.
Um, and it brings me to this word reparations,
Uh-huh.
because when I think about reparations, I think about holding someone to account
Yeah.
for what they have taken.
Yeah.
And I can become very emotional when I think about the villages in Kashmir that were burned to the ground, and the all that was taken from India and Kashmir,
Yeah. Yeah.
and from parts of that, from Africa. I can become incandescent around what needs to be restored and replaced and repaired. And then, Bayo, my heart sinks, because I know I know that is replicating something in me. In fact, it's the beginning of some kind of revenge, dare I say. You know, it's not. It's and 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 I know it's more complex than that, because this is our crisis is calling for repair and restoration. Of course, it is, in a material, physical way. And then that takes me, because I know my heart sinks and my heart needs something more, it takes me to the word rematriation, the uniting, the marriage between what is sacred and invisible, the repairing of that, the repairing of my culture's mystery, or it's right to have the mystery, it's right to be in its fullness of without having to explain itself, just to be in its full existence and its full ferociousness, its full beauty, it's um yeah, without giving reason, without giving any reason for it at all, just because it is, and so I wonder what that's what yeah, how that might or might not speak to you, that what I say now.
Mm. About rematriation?
Yeah, about the relationship between reparations, and global justice and rematriation, and what else? What else is there in that equation? Not that we and not that we could have a formula, but I'm saying there's a greater formula that we don't yet know,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
wanting to guess at it with you.
Hmm. I love what you just said. There's a greater formula we do not yet know. That is very powerful. A very powerful thing to say. Let me see if I could set the the scope of this and bring it down to earth a little. I read recently that ConocoPhillips, which is this oil exploration company headquartered in Texas, is is trying to this is a climate solution, by the way, um, address permafrost, the thawing of um, the ice um, and the soil by throwing in some kind of technology called chillers or thermal siphons into the ground, which has the effect of chilling the ground and restoring the ice so that they can continue exploration, right? Um, it's it's a way of it's a way of stabilizing the ground again. Again, this is what I refer to as um, or referred to earlier as modernity trying to concretize the ground so that it can continue to transcend the ground, so that it can continue to climb the ladder away from materiality. Um, so ConocoPhillips wants to do that, and I feel that is part of the poverty of imagination. Is that is part of what we are in now, the stuckness of our politics. That is seen as a solution. You know, chill the ground, and then you might combat global warming. You know, we're not just isolated in the perspective of liberal humanism. We're not isolated beings imagining solutions. We're part of this heap, this compost heap that thinks like a heap, and so we participate in this thinking together. And this is why what I'm about to say is what I'm about to say. Um, Reparations is, I feel, a very, very touchy subject. We
Mm,
need kind of restoration, right? I come from a country that was colonized by the British. In the museum, in the British Museum now, which is one of the largest museums on the planet, there are artifacts that belong to Nigerian tribes and cultures that have been there for years, and we've been trying our darndest to get them back to no
mhm,
avail. Um, and there is a part of me that feels angry that there are masked sacred artifacts that are there in the museum. And the museum says, no, we're not giving it back. We don't do that kind of work here. And a whole government is held beholden to this
mm,
museum and to the government, unable to get back what rightfully belongs to it.
mm,
That's just an example. I feel writ large, we're trying to regain some kind of things that have been lost. We're trying to, um, whether it's reparations in terms of payments, um, um, to get some kind of acknowledgement of the deeds and the awfulness of the transatlantic slave trade. Whatever it is, reparations is needed. I feel that it's a vital tool. However, this is the other tension here. This is the tension here, rather, that that there is a place of noticing that um, that reparations could be a bridge of, you know, a way to reincarcerate us, you know, reformulate or restore restore us back to the places that we're trying our darndest to leave behind. And that is something that we should hold very seriously. And I've been trying to speak about that. Many others are speaking about it as well. But we need a way of noticing that maybe the allies we need are have not been seen yet. You know how in America, I think in the UK as well, some people are called white allies, and there's
yeah,
this social justice framework that that
Yeah.
identifies those some white identified people as white allies.
Yeah.
And I honor their work, but I feel where we're going, we don't know the allies we need. We
Mm.
don't know who we should be listening to right now. And this work of not knowing is really vital, because what are we being saved into if we're working singularly or exclusively with white allies? What kind of economic, social, spiritual justice frameworks
Mm.
are we being restored to if reparations is the way to address the ills, the losses, the grievous sufferings and exclusions of the past? If that's all we've got, then we're in serious trouble. If a payment could address the slave trade, then darn, that's a horrible thing to consider.
It really is, and that's what I mean by my heart's thinking,
Yeah,
because um
yeah,
we don't pay ourselves out of that trauma that
yeah,
we inhabit through the suffering. This is where love comes in for me, and love of what we don't know, as you're pointing to, the love of the ally, the people we don't know we need, and the love of the strangers. Let's talk about love. I want to talk about love with you. I want to
love.
talk about I want to talk about what that means right now, right here, in terms of this wrestling that we're doing with these big words and with these longings and with what we know needs to be restored.
Love would be surrender to me. Surrender. And surrender to the more than human. Surrender to the things that exceed us. Surrender to the things that we don't know how to articulate yet. Love would be asking questions for me, and sharing our questions. Love would be noticing our wounds and entering into a shared collective vocation of sharing those wounds with others as a form of political refusal to the powers that insist that being coherent and intact is the only way of being alive and successful in the world. Love um, would be noticing that sometimes justice gets in the way of transformation, and it is hard work.
I want to just say a huge thank you for your time and your loving words, your incantations, your wisdom, your truth. Uh, these have been such blessings in this conversation, and thank you for showing up and being here with us.
Thank you very much, Skeena.